something goes wrong so I can get it all fixed. But like Troy said, I'm going to be giving an update on our cocoa bird monitoring that the Department of Agriculture does out on Eastland Dåno. So we'll start with just a little bit of background for those who may not be as familiar. So there were 2 releases of the cocoa bird. So this is following the disappearance of the cocoa in the wild on Guam because of the brown tree snake introduction. So they were brought into captivity, bred, and then we were able to reintroduce them or introduce them to Cocos Island first in 2010 and then again in 2012. And in both cases, within months of those initial releases, we already had signs of reproductive activity happening, which was fantastic news. And we do the majority of our monitoring through playback surveys currently. When they were first released, we did a lot of radio telemetry monitoring as well. Currently, playback surveys have been our most consistent method, and we do these by going out into the cocoa habitat and playing recordings of the coco's call over our loudspeakers and then seeing how many birds actually respond to us. We have to do this at dawn and dusk because that's when the birds are most active. And that means we get to spend the night out on the island when we do that, which is always an adventure. And so that gives us kind of a rough idea of how many birds are out there. It's not a super precise survey method simply because the birds are what we call cryptic. They're very secretive. They don't always respond to the callers. So we can't say for certain that just because we didn't hear a bird or we only heard one, that there's not, 5 or 6 out there, for example. So we're always kind of thinking of, how can we get at a more precise estimate or do a more thorough survey of the birds? And so what we've been, the results from our most recent surveys. So last year we got 4 of them done in November, February, and May. Our September one, we were out there, but it got rained out by bad weather. So we didn't get a lot of responses from the birds anyway. But our population estimate from those were somewhere in the range of 24 to 36 birds. As I said, though, we are always looking for some more robust survey methods. And so we have been working on introducing, got to keep those together, a camera monitoring method. And so some of you might recognize Jack Christie. So he's been out here a couple times working with DAR. He first came out to set up a camera monitoring system for monitor lizards out on Eastland Dåno. And this was actually super, super successful. Got a bunch of monitors on camera, but we also got a lot of cocoa birds. So it turns out since the cocoa are flightless and they are also running around on the ground, same as the monitors, they ended up on a lot of the camera images as well. And so we thought, well, let's actually design a camera monitoring system for the birds themselves. So a huge shout out to Jack. He put an enormous amount of work into the design of this study, the actual implementation, the analysis methodology. So a huge thank you. We could not have gotten this off the ground without his help. So this is what the stations actually look like. So it's a series of 3 roofing panel drift fences is what we call them. And these all kind of point towards the central area. And they're intended to kind of funnel any wildlife that's passing through the area into that kind of central area so that they have to pass underneath our camera. So that bucket that you see there, the 5-gallon upside down, inside that is a game camera pointed downwards at the ground, raised up on that pole. So anything that passes underneath will get photographed. So it's motion triggered and we have it set to do a 4-shot burst so we can kind of see activity that's happening anytime something passes underneath. All right, so we have a total of 30 stations out there, which is quite a few. We got a pretty good spread across the island. They're randomly located. We may tweak a couple of them to make sure that we're getting good representation in areas that we know that the cocoa are inhabiting. But these have been running since late August, early October when they were kind of getting set up out there. And we just pulled the cameras about a week ago for our first kind of big analysis of months worth of images. The cameras average somewhere between 200 to about 2,000 images per camera, and that's actual wildlife images. The cameras, unfortunately, do also get triggered by things like shadows moving or vegetation, plants. So there's a lot of extra images that we have to filter through, so it's quite a process. I think we're hoping that we can start getting some machine learning computer assistance filtering through those and at least getting down to the images that we are most interested in. But so far it's been my coworker Megan and I filtering through thousands and thousands of photos, but it's been exciting. It's been kind of a treasure hunt to see what we've got on there. All right, so for our results, first off, unfortunately, we had two cameras that did not operate as intended. One of them, unfortunately, did get stolen, just was outright gone when we went back to get it. And that was at a station that was pretty close to one of the walking trails, so it was just quite obvious to anyone walking by that it was there. So that one is gone. The one further up north that has the X on it there, that one was, I think we think it was just tampered with. We saw a couple faces pop up on the cameras and some folks investigating it, and then we got no further photos after that. So we think that maybe someone just turned that camera off for some reason. So unfortunately, those two didn't run as intended, but pretty much every single other station except for one detected at least one ko'ko', which was a fantastic result. I mean, we kind of have known from our playback studies that they're pretty well distributed across the entire island, but just to see it confirmed yet again on camera is really, really fantastic to see. They are really inhabiting the entire island. But they're not necessarily distributed at the same level, or we're not just detecting them at the same density levels. So 12 of those stations that we detected them at, we saw between 1 and 30 detections. And that doesn't mean 1 to 30 birds. We just detected a ko'ko' on 1 to 30 occasions, most likely the same bird or a couple of the same birds multiple times. Then we had 9 stations that detected ko'ko' 31 to 65 times, which is quite a few. And then one really impressive station in the center there that detected ko'ko' 270 times. So I'm guessing that this, may have something to do with the ko'ko' density in the different areas, but also likely has something to do with where the cameras are located in relation to the ko'ko's core habitat. So this big purple one, for example, is probably smack in the middle of a pair or a bird's territory. And so they are passing through that camera multiple times a day. Some of the others may be on the fringes of their habitat or their core area that they visit less frequently. All right, so now for the really exciting parts. We were able to see at 3 different stations, we had confirmations of active pairs. So we suspect that there are pairs throughout larger parts of the island, but unless we actually get 2 birds on the camera like this at the same time, we can't say for certain that we have a pair. So at these 3 stations, we had confirmed ko'ko' pairs foraging together, moving through the area together, which was fantastic. And even more exciting, where you have pairs, you have reproductive activity, which is really exciting. We kind of went nuts in the office when we saw this. This is a really big deal to actually have this on camera confirmed happening in the wild. I was talking to Suzanne about this, and we think that honestly, it may be the very first photographic documented evidence of ko'ko' breeding in the wild. We don't think this is something that was captured before they were lost in the wild here on Guam. And although it was observed, by staff out on Rhoda, where the birds have been introduced, it was never documented. And so we think this is probably the first documented case of it. So very, very excited about that. And then of course, where there is mating, you have chicks, also very exciting. So here we have one station here, and this is even a different station than where we had seen the pairs and the mating. So we do know that this is occurring at even more stations than where the pairs are seen. For example, we had these 2 chicks seen the day after Christmas this past December. We think that they're somewhere in the 3-week range at this point. They're already past their really small, vulnerable, fluffy chick stage. They're kind of moving into that in-between teenage stage. They're starting to get some of their more adult feathers. We saw them again on the 1st, so there they are, kind of scooting by. And then again, a couple days later on the 3rd. So you can already tell they're starting to get a bit bigger. They grow really rapidly. They reach full adult size in about a month. They still don't have all their adult plumage and appearance yet by that point, but they're getting to be pretty close to adult size already at about a month. So we didn't detect these guys again beyond that 3rd time, but considering the fact that they're already kind of at this larger size, we are optimistic that they probably survived to adulthood. So that's a great sign. We did catch more than just ko'ko' on these cameras, of course. There's a whole lot of wildlife out there. Quite a long list of stuff that we saw. We saw Pacific reef herons, the Philippine collared dove, Eurasian tree sparrows, all sorts of crabs, hermit, coconut, and land crabs. We saw skinks and geckos. And then a couple interesting things. We actually got on camera a couple times some greater banded hornets, which was interesting. So don't like seeing those on camera, but it's good to know that we can catch those sort of things if they do appear out there. And thankfully, some notable absences, things we did not see. We did not see any rodents. We did not see any snakes, which you wouldn't necessarily expect on the ground, but still worth noting. And also no cats and dogs. Also very good news from the birds. In previous camera trapping, we have seen a dog or two that we think was brought over by the public enjoying the island. So just also good confirmation we don't see that happening at the moment. And then, of course, got to talk about the HITA. Besides the ko'ko, they were the second most frequently detected species out there. And I personally was really fascinated by the variety of things that we saw in the HITA. So, for example, those top two images really show the size difference between individuals. So that first guy is such a big, mature, old individual. He literally doesn't even fit in the entire frame of the image. And then next to him there on the right is a very, very young HITA, very, very tiny. So really cool to see the different life stages. We saw all the different sizes you can imagine out there. The bottom left corner, if you can see that, this one was really uniquely identifiable. He looked like he'd maybe gotten into a fight or something like that. He was missing a bunch of scales on top of his head. And he popped up on a couple different cameras as well. So it was cool to have one that was uniquely identifiable so we could actually track his movements. And kind of similarly with the one on the bottom right, I threw that one in there because it was a really unique sort of color pattern. A lot of them are pretty consistently, they're black with yellow spots across their body, but this guy seemed to have kind of different sections that were either more or less dark. We also did get some interesting behaviors from the monitor lizards. They were really curious about the camera traps. We had at least 3 occasions where they got themselves up onto the bucket and we're trying to figure out what exactly was going on. That top right guy, you can see, investigates for a little bit, and we actually captured the moment where he just dropped himself back off the bucket onto the ground. The one next to it just kind of hangs there for a few minutes. And the one on the bottom, you can see his tongue flicking behavior as he's trying to figure out what's going on. But the HITA were not the only ones that were curious about what was going on in the buckets. The ko'ko also are very observant. They're very curious. We had multiple occasions where passing through, we kind of see them stop and looking around. And then you see their kind of heads turn up to look up at the camera and try and figure out what's going on up there. And we've seen this before with other cameras out there. They're very inquisitive. They're very curious. They want to check things out. They want to understand what's going on. We also had an occasion of one ko'ko who appeared to jump at the camera. I'm not sure. Maybe there was something in there he wanted to get to. I'm not sure. But he actually sort of jumped up at the camera to see what was going on. And we also caught some other just natural ko'ko behavior going on. So the ko'ko are very territorial. So we did catch one instance of what we believe is 2 ko'ko in a sort of territorial dispute. And it's amazing that we managed to get that on the camera, that they happened to do that underneath one of our trapping stations. Is pretty fantastic. So where we go from here, this has been really great descriptive data and really interesting to get that photographic evidence of reproduction happening. The next step for us is going to be putting this through our analysis to actually get an idea of how many birds we are detecting. Because that's our goal, is we want to refine that number, get a more confident number of how many birds are out there. So that's going to take a little more work, some more statistical analysis in the process there, but that's going to be the next step for it. And right now, this is what we call an unmarked study. So none of these birds, well, very few of these birds are identifiable in the same way that HITA was, for example. All the ko'ko birds from the back look roughly the same. There might be a couple that have, say, a couple white feathers or something that's uniquely identifiable, and that's great. That will help our analysis. But if there was a way that we knew each bird individually and could pair up the camera detections with that bird, that would really help refine our estimates even further. So we've been brainstorming and trying to think of ways to get them uniquely marked. And it's challenging because we can't necessarily just, put something on the back of the birds themselves. And so sometimes we think of for birds, leg bands. From a top down, leg bands are kind of tricky to see. We've thought about, what about like color systems of some kind? Well, because the ko'ko are crepuscular and dawn and dusk is sometimes the more active hours, when the camera switches into nighttime mode, essentially, it goes into black and white. And so colors won't necessarily stand out from each other. And so the thing that we've kind of landed on probably the best method until we think of something else is to use pit tags. So for those not familiar, pit tags are these small, they're about the size of a grain of rice, these little transmitters that can be attached to, say, a bird band on the leg. And if we put a receiver at each of the cameras, then anytime one of those birds passes under the camera, the receiver reads the transmitter from the bird and says, okay, well, that was bird number 18 that passed under that camera. And so that would be a good way for us to track, so each individual bird, where they show up and when, and that would help us refine our estimates. So that might be a future direction that we're able to pursue as well. So that is what I have for you today. Really exciting developments. We're excited to see where it goes next. We're still going to be doing our playback surveys as sort of a, well, we're going to do both methods at the same time, so that then when we get our refined estimates, we can compare and see, how well was our playback survey estimating? And if we can get a ratio between those, then we can go back in time through all of our playback surveys and say, okay, well, this is probably what the estimates of population size were at those times as well. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lauren. That was a great presentation. I know those birds have no shame either, too. Huh? It's pretty hilarious.
So we have one question thrown out from the audience, if that's all right. Someone asked what crepuscular means. And that means active at dawn and dusk. So if you think of cats, for example, raccoons, other animals. So dawn and dusk is their most active time. And that doesn't mean that we don't see them in the middle of the day. It's just not their kind of peak activity time. Sorry, Troy.
No, that's perfect. So we do have one question in the chat from Norma, and Norma asks, were the birds banded prior to their release on the island? And if so, have you considered replacing cameras near ground level attached to the legs of your current setup so you could do band resites?
So for those in the audience, the question asked was whether the birds were banded when they were first released on the island, and whether we've thought about putting some cameras down at ground level. So yes, the birds were all banded when they were first released. All 26 of those were banded, and they also had their radio telemetry backpacks as well. So we tracked them for quite a while till those fell off. At this point, we're probably dealing with an entirely wild-born species or population. So none of these birds probably are banded at this point, or very few that have survived long enough. We do want to restart our capturing. So putting traps back out there, catching the birds, putting new bands on there so we can start to identify this population again. And putting the cameras up above has just sort of seemed like the best unintrusive way to design it. I think there were some initial trials of putting the cameras down low, but the birds seemed even more kind of inquisitive about the cameras. They'd really come up to them and investigate them, and we don't want to disturb their natural behavior too much. Yeah, I think that's kind of why we went with this above from the top perspective.
Awesome. All right. We have, that's what it looks like in the chat. Does anyone online have any other questions for Lauren off the top of their heads that they want to jump in?
I think we have a couple questions here, if that's all right.
Yep, go for it.
This is Cocos Island, yes, down south. Sorry, I should have done a big map to point out that, but yes, that's Cocos Island down south. It's a beautiful island. Yeah. Karen?
Are there plans for more leases of Coco, or is the island kind of at max capacity?
Yeah, so Farron was asking if the island is at max capacity or if there are more planned releases. At the moment, there's not any planned releases. We think the island is probably approaching capacity, the fact that they've already distributed themselves across the whole island. I think the initial carrying capacity estimates were in the 40 to 50 range, so there might be room for a few more, but it kind of depends on territory size, for example, and we have seen examples where a bird, say, gets trapped inside other birds' territories. And if they're not able to find their way out of there and get their own habitat, they kind of get harassed and become unable to feed themselves and take care of themselves. And we did have one sort of death that we attributed to being stuck in another bird's territory. So we are definitely hesitant about putting more out there than the area can support. Though if we, are able to get through our analysis and see what the actual number is, if it is indeed lower, there might be room for a few more, but we definitely don't want to overload it. I have another question. So the question was, where else on Guam are the birds found? Unfortunately, they are not found anywhere else in the wild on Guam. They are only found at our captive breeding facility. So it is our hope, of course, that eventually we will have locations on Guam where the bird can be put back. But at the moment, we don't have any areas that are sufficiently snake suppressed. We don't believe that we need to be 100% snake free, as Isla Dåno proves or suggests. You know, there are snakes out there, but that number is very suppressed and the birds are thriving and doing fantastic. So we do hope to get them back on the Guam landscape, but they are not currently there yet. Olympia has a question.
Do you have so I'm wondering, during that time, how many birds were there, and compared to this time now, after 5 years of people removing snakes from the island?
Yeah, so Olympia's question was about how the birds' numbers have changed from release to now, given snake presence. I don't know that we know that the snake was necessarily more abundant back then. I don't think it was officially confirmed until 2020. So I don't think it was released at a point where there was a really high snake density, for example. When they were released, it was those original 10 and 16 birds, so a population of 26. And we had the telemetry going to see how they were surviving. And I've actually just been analyzing some of that. And it looks like a pretty high survival rate for the birds, honestly, about 80% annual survival, which is really high. We will have to go back through and do our comparison. So when we get through this analysis here and get a secure number of what we think the population is now, and we can compare that to our playback studies and then go back in time to see what that means for those playback studies, we'll probably be able to see pretty quick increase in population size to that sort of carrying capacity that we think that they've reached about now, because their reproductive potential is just fantastic. As a species, they are built to breed, they reproduce very quickly. And so we think that that's most likely what happened. And when we get through this research and can go back and look at those over time, that's what we expect to see. Another question in the back here. So the question is about the cocoa birds on Rota. So the birds on Rota was actually the first place, well, I don't know about the first place, but the birds were first put back onto Rota in 1989. That was when they were first introduced up on Rota. So this was a novel introduction, not a place that they had been present before. That went on for 30 years, these big releases of lots and lots of birds. And for a time, I think the population was doing pretty well out there. But the big challenge with Rota is that there's a lot of feral cats there, which unfortunately have learned to predate on the forest birds. And the cocoa, being a ground dwelling bird, was less capable even than like tree dwelling birds at getting away from those cats. And so cat predation was a huge, huge pressure. And so that population was in constant need of reinforcement, of additional birds being released to support it. And unfortunately, that number has just dwindled and dwindled over the years, to the point that now we kind of have to function with the understanding that the birds are likely extirpated and no longer present on Rota, or reduced to the point that functionally as a population, they are not present on Rota, unfortunately.
Okay, Lauren,
Yes.
just real quick, we're going to take one question from the chat and then we'll circle back for any questions in the room at the end of Farron's talk. So just for all of the people in the room, just let them know to keep note of their questions and we'll have time at the end. So we have one question in the chat here from Mike Gowell. He has a question. Is there concern over inbreeding of this small population?
Okay, so for everybody in the room, there was one question from the chat that we're going to answer, and then we need to move on to Farron. But if you hold on to your questions, we can answer them all at the end. Farron and I will stick around to answer questions. So the question from online was about whether there's concerns of inbreeding on the island. And with such a small population, that's always absolutely a concern. all of the cocoa birds today, period, on Guam, on Isla Dåno, everywhere, are descended from, I believe, only 21 original birds that were put into captivity. So that inbreeding concern is always there. The birds that were put out on Dåno were very specifically chosen for a number of reasons, age, sex, but genetic diversity was one of the factors that led to those birds being selected. And so we actually have a researcher right now from the University of Florida who's helping do some genetic analysis on those birds. And so that'll kind of give us a clue of how they're doing out there, but they were specifically selected to kind of maximize the reproductive or the genetic diversity that we had in the population to start with. So we think they had a pretty good start, a pretty good chance, but it will be interesting to see those results. And I will hand it over to Farron. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lauren. Great job.
I'm going to switch things over, and while I'm doing so, we have Senator Perez in the room, and I don't want to make her wait in case she has to run. So go ahead and ask your question, Senator, and I'm going to switch things over.
Yeah, so the question was what the recovery plan is for the cocoa bird, which is a fantastic question. The recovery vision, the goal would be to have these birds back on the Guam landscape where the public can see them, where they're present, where they historically have been. That, of course, is the driving goal. From a biological perspective, we also want to, think about having insurance populations additionally elsewhere as well. So one of the good things about Cocos Island is it is sort of separate from Guam, and so that protects that population, for example. So when we get some back on Guam, that's goal number one. We also want to have insurance populations, whether that's elsewhere in the CNMI, whether we continue with Rhoda or look at other islands or other locations beyond as well. We think about places like Palmyra, where the sea hick is, for example, or other locations. We want to think big for the cocoa. We want to make sure that it is safe, represented on Guam, and around for generations to come. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lauren. Great job. And there are a couple questions in the chat. We'll get to those at the end, but thanks to everyone in the room as well for asking questions. All right, Farron, if you want to get your presentation pulled up. So our next presenter is a gentleman that many of you probably have seen possibly on Instagram. He's very active in the Guam conservation community, and he's known as the Guam guy on Instagram. So if you haven't followed his page, it is a very entertaining and informative page. And so I'll turn it over to Farron. Farron has been doing some interesting field tests of his own. And with that, I will let him take over, and you have the floor, Farron. So thanks so much.
All right, thanks, Troy. Can you hear me okay? You see my screen okay? All right. Hapaday Toda Samzu, Guahu si Farron Taijeron on social media. I go by the Guam guy. I've been sending around the flyer for this talk, and some people replied back, kind of laughing about the almost scientific line in my title. And of course, it is a bit tongue-in-cheek, but it's also genuine because this project was never meant to scale up to what it has become. And I do read from notes because I will never finish if I don't stick to my notes. So just bear with me, like looking down all the time. And but anyway, just to set the bar as low as possible, I'm going to tell you the story of how this began. If you're unfamiliar with my social media, I post educational videos about the environment and adventure safety on Guam. I like to describe my content as a mix of David Attenborough and Bear Grylls before he got kind of too cringe. And so one video I made was about searching for snakes on Dåno with Olympia there, and actually maybe half the people in this room. And there was a viewer that suggested in the comments that snakes got to the island, to Dåno or Cocos, by swimming there. I immediately dismissed this idea, but then I figured, hey, it wouldn't be that hard to test. I'm in the water all the time anyway. It would also make for a good video and hopefully get more people's attention and encourage them to hopefully volunteer to go snake searching on Dåno. So what started essentially as a video reply to an Instagram comment eventually ended with a call to Guam Fire Department search and rescue.
That was all good. Bill, we're okay. Bill, we're okay. Whoever called, Whoever called these guys, thanks for their concern, but we're okay.
So now it was a false alarm and we did not require assistance, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So we'll come back to the social media side later and proceed to the almost scienced now directly. My research question was simple. If a snake wanted to swim to Cocos, to Dåno, then could it? To answer this question, I conducted trials of swimming trials of 21 snakes as small as 20 inches to as big as over 8 feet long. Through various means, locations, and weather conditions, I released and followed the snakes in the water. In this part of the talk, I'm going to answer my research question and share some observations. This particular snake swam for 3.2 kilometers, and the shortest distance between Molleso and Dåno is 2.4 kilometers, considerably less. 2 of the 21 snakes, or about 10%, swam for at least that distance. So right off the bat, we know some snakes can make it to Dåno because they demonstrated they can swim that distance already. But most snakes don't just swim the entire time. 76% of the snakes would stop swimming, assume a resting posture, and take breaks. In these breaks, the snakes would let as little as some of their tail to as much as most of their body dangle underwater. Using air in their lungs, the snakes are able to buoy themselves enough to keep their heads above water and extend their swim times. Based on admittedly casually taken data, camera footage, and my notes and recollections, snakes would progressively take more frequent and longer breaks the longer the swims went on. I also tracked the direction snakes swam. For whatever reason, half of snakes just go with the wind, even if it was directly away from land, or in some cases, they would pass right by land. So here's an example of a snake that just went downwind, period. Knowing if a snake was traveling downwind or not was determined by my in-situ observations and or weather records for that day. Now, this is significant in the context of Dåno specifically because the trade winds on Guam are east to northeast, and the central and western parts of Molleso are both on the closest distance to Dåno, and the island lies downwind from those areas. But this begs the question how snakes would even enter the water. There's always the possibility a tree or a branch, a snake is on, breaks off, falls into the river, and is carried out to sea. But I was wondering, would a snake ever choose to enter the ocean? The short answer is yes, and we have it on video. This snake was part of the experiment. It was released midway between the beach and the surf zone outside Jimmy D's area. It took a convoluted route in just about every direction relative to wind and land. And at one point during the trial, we allowed the snake to return to the beach and touch sand. Not touch grass for the Gen Z people. However, we did position ourselves to discourage it from going further inland or upland. And with the options of becoming aggressive to us, continuing to slither along the beach, staying in place, or re-entering the water, it chose to go swimming again. And so obviously, I just love how it wags its tail like a dog. it's like it's happy to go swimming. Obviously, our presence was a big factor in this situation, but it isn't hard to imagine a cat or a pack of dogs threatening a snake and the snake choosing to enter the water to escape. So here's at least one circumstance a snake would enter the ocean. There's also certainly been a number of anecdotes of people saying they saw snakes in the water, but community reports can be hit or miss. So if someone tells me they saw a snake in the water, I trust that they saw something, but if we want to get specific about the exact species, then I follow the rule of pigs or it didn't happen. And here's one time that happened. With hundreds of thousands of views of my experiment, people's minds were on snakes in the water when my friend Ryan Reginden got this message from his friend, which he shared with me. So here we have a paddler on her way from Tumon to Two Lovers Point when she encounters this snake and scoops it up. She asks if it's part of my experiment, and the only way to be sure is to ask a disturbing question. So I ask her the question, there's no way of, I'll read it out. There's no way to say this without sounding like a psychopath, but did it have a head? It's like a mafia boss kind of thing to say. Anyway, the picture was a really degraded quality from being screenshotted and sent through WhatsApp, so I couldn't be too sure if it had a head or not. But the reason I asked is because I removed the heads of the snakes that I leave in the water, and I didn't lose any snakes in this area. So in any case, there is no way to know the circumstances of how the snake got in the water, but there it was, nonetheless, on camera, swimming downwind, and I had nothing to do with it. For whatever reason, snakes might wind up in the water. Let's look at how the ones in this study performed. And for my herpers and data nerds in the crowd, we have a long-awaited graph. Once again, I swam with 21 snakes and tracked the duration of their swims. My protocol was to end each trial when each snake would be unable to keep their heads above water for 10 seconds. Snakes ranged from 53 centimeters to 253 centimeters. That's the 8-footer I was talking about. And swims were as little as 3 minutes to as long as 2 hours. And because of that, I decided early on I would set a time limit of 2 hours for each trial if a snake didn't otherwise meet the ending protocol. As you can see, there is a not amazing association between total length and swim time with the R-squared of about 0.3. So if that doesn't mean anything to you, it means this graph predicts like 30% of the results. So it's not definitely not a 1-to-1 ratio of size equaling swim time. I track total length for 2 reasons. One, for outreach purposes. People only care about total length, and SVL means nothing to lay people. The second reason is because tails contribute to the buoyancy profile of a snake. With no air spaces and less fat content, presumably in tails, then you can expect a snake to work harder to swim or to stay afloat. Of course, I couldn't leave my herper friends hanging and started tracking SVL. That's snout vent length, beginning with my 5th snake. So the N, or sample of this graph, is 17 snakes compared to 21. And the distribution and R-squared value is even less satisfying than the previous one. But being the dive professional that I am, I know some people float more easily than others, and some just sink like rocks depending on their lung capacity and body fat content. So I wanted to find a way to account for snakes that might be the same length but have different girths, for example. So just for fun, I applied a modified formula for BMI meant for humans onto snakes. And I again ran this for total length and weight, as well as SVL and weight separately by swim times. And here are those results. Sorry if you're as excited as I was and as disappointed as I am at seeing this measly R-squared value of 0.02. So yeah, it's just this is maybe one of the saddest graphs I've seen, and I had to be the one to make it. And just to double down on the sadness, for the sake of being thorough, here's the BMI SVL chart, which is equally disappointing. And but I'm not closing the book yet on finding a way to bring mass and length together to give stronger predictive power of swimming capacity. But human BMI math is not the way to do it. But I figured also, you know, why should we be alone with being self-conscious about our BMIs? We should share that with the other species. By now, you're probably wondering why I'm showing you swim durations and not distance. The honest answer is when I started this experiment, I didn't have a good device to do that with. But thanks to a huge discount from GMI and some donations from my followers, I was eventually able to buy a nice Garmin watch. And I wish I could say I tracked more snakes than I did, but let's roll with what I have. This was the last snake in the study, and it was tracked with my new Garmin. And you can see it swam for 1.5 kilometers. That's about a mile, over nearly 2 hours at an average rate of 0.77 kilometers per hour. You can also see it traveled mostly downwind with the wind at 18 miles an hour coming from the east. If you got a keen eye, you can see that this is the snake that was allowed to return to land and then went back out into the water. You can also tell this wasn't made by a Garmin. This track was produced manually with visual references and familiarity with the area for a rough approximation. And that approximation is the snake traveled an estimated 3 kilometers, so almost about 2 miles, and moved at an average rate of 1.5 kilometers per hour. Again, we have a track produced manually, but this one is based on GPS coordinates taken from a boat So I would consider it a more than reasonable approximation. And this snake traveled a huge 3.26 kilometers and swam an average of 2.17 kilometers per hour. According to my observations that day and weather records, this was also a totally downwind snake. So yeah, we know the closest distance to Dåno. We have swim times for 21 snakes, and I just showed you a sample of 3 speeds. So let's apply those swim times to various speeds and see how far we get. The blue cells are snakes with known distance, speeds, and times. The 3 columns on the right is the expected distance in kilometers by calculated speed. For example, number 21 on the bottom, in reality did 1.5 kilometers at a rate of 0.77 kilometers per hour. And at this lower speed, none of the snakes would have made it to Dåno in a straight up swim in the durations they actually swam. If we take the middle speed of 1.5 kilometers per hour, then 3 snakes, those ones in yellow, or 14%, could make the distance in a straight up swim. If we take the top speed of 2.17 kilometers per hour, then we get 8 snakes, or 38% of the sample that could get to Dåno. This is just playing around with numbers, so do with it what you will, but keep it in mind as we continue on. Back to the beach snake. I can't say for certain, but it might be using its tail to keep itself off the bottom. On land, right? Yeah, the camera kind of just goes out of frame there. On land, we know snakes extend themselves vertically up, so it doesn't seem impossible that they'd support their weight by reaching down in the water when it's shallow enough. I tell you this because there are shallow areas in the lagoon, as well as Bikini Island and Babi Island, so snakes could island hop those islands on their way to Dåno, especially if they're downwind from where they start and the wind is blowing at just the right angle. And even ignoring the islands at low enough tides, there are shallow areas snakes could stand up like we would and just take a break. But instead of standing, what about floating objects that might be out there? First of all, this photo is staged, so don't even worry about it. It was opportunistically taken because the tourists lost their stuff and it blew out to us when we were doing another swim test. Anyway, the next things I'm going to talk about are not staged. As I mentioned before, it's easy to imagine snakes riding floating trees or branches out from rivers, but would a snake already in the water try to board floating objects? 6 snakes, or 29% of the sample, exhibited boarding behaviors by making clear attempts to get on me, my camera, kayak, or boat, and a couple of them actually did board floating objects. This is one of those times where friends go, trust me, bro, I got you. On this swim, I was with my friend Mike Kitticle on the kayak there, and we noticed one snake going for the kayak. So I mentioned to him that sometimes they do that. And to confirm if they actually would board the kayak, we decided to let it try. And it boarded the kayak 3 times in quick succession. But I'm like, oh, this is getting serious. I better like not let it bite my friend. None of us have been bit yet. None of the people that doing the swim trials have been bit yet in the water. I got a question from a viewer if I thought snakes would ride floating coconuts. And, you know, I'm like, all right, that won't be hard to test. So on a day we had my friend Timmy Toy's boat out, we tried to drop the coconut in the swim path of the snake. And I eventually just started throwing it ahead of us and ignored the coconut multiple times. But at 44 minutes into the swim, it fully got on the coconut and rested for a bit. Personally, in all my years of diving, I've seen more decomposing coconuts underwater than floating on the surface, but I thought it was cool that I was able to get an answer to a viewer's question. And going the opposite direction next, now we're going to talk about snakes that sank. Here is one of those 50% snakes that just swim downwind. In this case, it swam directly into the surf zone too, because it was unsafe for us to
Wrong
follow.
way! No! Don't go out!
I was like Titanic. Don't let go, Jack! It swam directly into the surf zone, and because it was unsafe for us to follow it through the surf zone, we observed it from the kayak, saw it actually met the criteria to end the trial as its head was underwater for longer than 10 seconds, and we stopped the time. We then paddled our kayak to a channel that leads outside the reef safely, but we could not relocate the snake. This was one of 3 snakes that were lost to the deep. The second snake was similarly swam into the reserve zone and did not recover. The third snake was something else. On this particular day, I did 2 swim trials. After a challenging long swim on the first trial, we released this second snake. I reasoned that I could take a rest on the boat and jump in when it would start taking rests or showing signs of struggle. And over its 16-minute long swim, it either swam downwind or toward the boat. We even allowed it to try to board the boat to see if it could. However, on its last attempt, it quickly sank and never came back up, and I was not prepared to jump in quite that fast to recover it, and so it was lost. So if this research is ever going to be done again, I would recommend someone always being in the water and being cognizant if you release a snake in or outside a reef, the wind direction. And that brings us back to when search and rescue came for me. We launched a kayak, that kayak on the left, and you can see the snake in the shot there too, out of Tumon. People on the beach saw 2 people, me and my friend, on that kayak paddle outside the reef. But for most of the time, there was only 1 person on the kayak because I was in the water and the snake. With how long we were out there, the lifeguard at Matapang noticed our unusual behavior and so made the call to report possible distressed swimmers. Near the end of this particular swim trial, the Guam Fire Department boat rolled up on us and asked if we're okay. Another member of the crew asked, "Is that a snake?" Which I confirmed. And if I heard them right, someone on the boat also recognized me from my videos. So they're like, okay, this guy, HITA, right? All right. I mentioned I got 21 snakes and they came from all around the island and from all kinds of people. Taking advantage of my reach and social media platform, I put a call out for live snakes if people feel like they could catch them safely. To sweeten the deal and maybe spur some friendly competition, I made a leaderboard that showed the rankings of the snakes and the people who caught them. Obviously, most of this is their Instagram handles. And I'm guessing this idea terrifies, resource managers, and rightly so, who live and breathe liability. And of all the 21 snakes, how many do you think bit people? Just yell out a number. The answer isn't 0. 2? All right, so 12. All right, so someone said 2. That's the right answer. One guy got bit in the finger in the process
There's
of
the
catching
bottom
his
jaw,
snake.
looks like, and then there's the top, wrapped all the way around. That's awesome.
Yeah, so,
Okay.
All right. It matters, but, okay, I'm like, that's awesome. I'm laughing it off, right? Not something you normally do, but in matters of liability, as the great Joe Kanatsa once said, it was my nephew, so it's okay. The next victim is the stuff of nightmares. Okay. Trigger warning coming up. In a moment when we're most vulnerable and least prepared for a potential snake encounter, a 6'2" monster slithered up someone's toilet and bit them in the butt. So up next, I'm going to show you footage of me catching that snake from the toilet. You can't see any blood or talkie, but look away now if you don't want this image burned into your mind forever. All right, so this is a horror story, okay? So the family contacted me and said snakes have come up this toilet before. The snake tongs are actually theirs, and this is one of the reasons they even have it. They told me, they actually gifted me those snake tongs, by the way. They told me the snake will periodically poke its head out to check if it's clear, and that's when they usually catch the snake to dispatch it. Sure enough, I showed up, offered to stand guard, and after maybe 15 minutes, the snake poked its head out and I caught it. If conservation is too academic for people, if caring about birds just doesn't hit enough people in the fields, then I can't imagine a greater motivation for people to care about ridding our island of snakes than the fear of getting bit when you're pants down on the toilet.
All today, Guam. This is a snake in a pickle jar, and we're gonna release in 3, 2, 1.
Of all the people who gave me snakes, I do know most of them, but there was a handful that I didn't, and I want to talk about one of them in particular. This 5-footer was caught by a then 12-year-old girl named Juliana. I meet people all the time who tell me they enjoy my videos, and I'm mostly over my own awkwardness and appreciate people showing their support. But the ones that I extra appreciate are when teachers and parents tell me they show their kids my content. This was the case with Juliana and her mom, who found a snake and thought to catch it to give it to me for this experiment. I know a lot of us in the sciences aren't super interested in outreach, and that's okay. Frankly, I'm sure we can all think of some grouch from our offices who shouldn't even be allowed to do outreach, and that's okay too. But if you can, do hire that science communicator or contract it out. You can't do your job forever, and someone needs to inspire your future replacement to pick up the torch. So with that, I want to thank everyone who helped in any way, big or small, with this project. This isn't even a complete list. Some people asked to stay anonymous, and I respected that. I call this almost science or a pilot project if you want to be generous. But this was done with zero funding or resources, and our community really showed up to make it happen. And every time I wanted to stop doing more trials, someone would offer me more snakes. Or we had that special girl, Juliana, who I can't turn that down, a 12-year-old girl snake, right? So it kept going, and it grew to 21 slims. And just a free outreach idea, if anybody does work with snakes, maybe is it cake, brown tree snake edition, and maybe don't have a real snake. Maybe make sure they're all cake, because you'll just traumatize someone for life if they cut into an actual snake, right? So make sure they're all cake. And that's me, and thanks for listening, and I'm down to take all your questions.
Awesome. Great job, Farron. All right, just real quick before you turn it over to the room, there are a couple of questions and comments in the chat, so we'll get to those
real quick first.
And just for the people in the room too, I'm gonna keep the meeting going on past the top of the hour. So if anyone wants to stick around and ask questions, we'll just get through all of that. If you do have to drop off, I will be sharing the recording later. Okay, so first off in the chat, we have Aaron Collins from USDA Wildlife Services, and he just mentioned that they have found that BTS will swim out into ponds and wetlands to visit moorhen nests and platforms. And he's just making the point that they might not be avid swimmers, but they definitely can do it over short distances if they have the right enticement. So thank you for that comment, Aaron. Another comment in the chat or question.
Yeah, I got the chat up, Troy. I'll take it. So yeah, thanks, Aaron. Yeah, I figured snakes would be able to swim, across rivers or some maybe freshwater environments, but not for any significant distance. But yeah, it's good to know that there's other evidence of snake swimming. Up next in the chat, we have Malia Nafis, I hope I'm saying that even half correctly. Did the toilet snake swim longer? What kind of conditioning goes into lasting 122 minutes of swimming for a BTS? The toilet snake, it was special actually. It could have swam longer, but that's one of the snake. That is the only snake where I ended the trial early because of safety conditions. And so I don't remember how long it swam. That was not the 122-minute one, but it swam well over an hour, and it was it was actually an impressive specimen with how far it was able to go. But it's not quite swimming, but that's also evidence of snakes in water, right? They have to, if they're coming up the toilet. Conditioning, I didn't even get to talk about this, but those plastic drawers from Kmart, right? They're usually like 3 high. That was my snake hotel, as I call it, Hotel Kulabla, because I had to keep the snakes somewhere, and I don't have, again, funding or any proper equipment. So I drilled a bunch of holes in there and used duct tape to keep it sealed. And so most snakes were in there from 1 day to as much as a month, except for 2, which were both 3 months in captivity. They had no food, but they did have water that whole time because those snakes were donated from George Washington High School class or club, and they gave me their snakes. And one of those was like the 3rd longest swim, if I recall correctly. So yeah, no conditioning. It's just how long I have them in captivity before I release them. Another question online: are snakes on all the islets off of Guam and not just Dåno? Seems like they would be based on what you're showing us here. I'm speaking out of turn, but I think there's some found on Anai, and is there anything else? Just people in the room? Oh, sorry. No, the research. We'll come back. Oh, you'll be first, I promise. Are there snakes on Anai?
Yeah, Farron, just jumping in on that one. I believe that is true, and that folks have mentioned that there has been a fall off of shorebirds and that sort of thing on the islets that they do know there are snakes on. And Robert,
Right,
just in the chat, just real quick, Jonathan, for you in the chat, I know that Robert Fisher has talked about that specific example. So just double check with him.
Thanks. Okay, and there's some nice words of encouragement in the comments as well. Okay, I've been making you wait. What's your question? Thank you. Yeah, question was confirming if I cut the heads off of snakes. And yes, I am confirming that. So this snake, this experiment is not like approved by anybody, which is why it hasn't been done before for this species. So that said, I still want to be humane to the snakes. Like, I'm not drowning them on purpose. I'm not torturing them. And so that's why my protocol is so short as well. Like, when their heads are underwater for 10 seconds, I'm like, okay, they're you know, that's it, they're failed. Like, I'm considering them like starting to be drowning at that point, instead of just letting them actually drown. And so the field euthanization protocol on land is to, or one of them anyway, is to grab the snake by the tail, whip it overhead, and whip it over your head so its head slams the ground, and then you can step on its head and rip it off. And that's one way to stun the snake so they don't feel any more pain from that. I don't have that option in the water, and so I just have to cut their heads off. When I spearfish, I stab fish in the brains to you know, put them out of their misery as well. And so that's my way of trying to be humane to the snakes, because you know, we're not trying to keep snakes alive. They're quite invasive, as you've heard. They've eaten all our forest birds, and so I'm definitely not bringing any back alive and releasing them. Yeah, good. No, definitely not. Yeah.
Okay, just real quick, Farron, just because I know some people have to cut out here. I will be sharing the recorded presentation from both Lauren and Farron through the listserv, so that will be coming out if you have to drop off. For those of you that do have to leave, thank you so much for attending online. We will be having our next round of talks next week with Dr. Lawrence Reeves from the University of Florida Medical Entomology Lab, talking a little bit about BTS detection through mosquito blood meals. So make sure you turn in next week, and I will be sending out more information online with that. So with that being said, Farron, we'll turn it back over to you for more questions. And if anyone has questions for Lauren, feel free to jump in.
Thanks. Okay, so just with the rounding off a bit about the head thing off, just a fun fact. I did remove the head off of one snake, and it continued to float for at least another 6 minutes. And so even without the head, it was just purely positively buoyant, but we had other snakes to swim with that day. And so we had to leave it, but I wish I could have stayed with it and see how long it stayed floating. Let's get someone else first if we have other questions. Eric? Question was, did I do any tests at night? No, I didn't. What do you call it? If someone paid me to do it, I'd be happy to, but no. This was mostly done opportunistically when I had other things to do in the water. And when the hotel Kuleba got too full, then I would, like, you know, just make a day to do some more swims. Exactly, yeah. So they're nocturnal and arboreal, right? So like, this is kind of worst case scenario for the snakes, and they're still able to kind of pull off some of them still able to pull off these really impressive swims, both in terms of time and length and distance. So yeah. So if I did it at night, I would not at all be surprised to see them go quite a bit further. Anybody other questions? Okay, back to you. Yeah, I've never seen one go underwater more than like 6 inches on purpose. A couple of the snakes would just go underwater and like kind of continue swimming like at the same rate they were at the surface, not showing any other signs of stress, but none are intentional. None are hunting down there. One thing, and I don't know what this means, but one of them in particular, most of them actually that go underwater will still continue to flick their tongues underwater, and I don't know why they do that. It's kind of funny when they do it when they're swimming, because their tongue, just by the drag, kind of like folds under them, just from the drag of being in the water. You know, like your hair like flows behind you, their tongues flow behind them when they're flicking their tongue out underwater. Any other questions? All right, let me double check the chat. Okay, thanks, MJ. Any other questions for Lauren? You're still here.
The one question for Lauren, it was more of a comment. Was wondering if
right?
was just wondering if
yeah. Olympia's asking a question. She's talking right now. Sorry. Go ahead, Olympia.
Okay.
Repeat the question.
Thank you, Olympia. Yeah, so Olympia's question was in response or in regards to the cocoa recovery plan, one of the big goals should be snake eradication, right? For all bird recovery on Guam, of course, we want, snake eradication is always going to be the goal. One important point that we just want to make for the cocoa is that we don't necessarily want to wait all the way for eradication. That's going to be a long and difficult process. We're going to keep working towards it, but it's going to be difficult to achieve. And we don't necessarily want to wait that long to get the birds back on the landscape, especially if we've seen that they can thrive at low snake densities where they're suppressed. So that's kind of going to be our first kind of like goalpost measure. Our first goal is getting them back on the landscape in areas where the snakes have been successfully suppressed. So that's going to be goal number.
So does that mean that
It absolutely could. It could. It's going to rely on a lot of different things. We also have to make sure that it's safe from dogs and cats, traffic. I mean, there are a lot of concerns that'll go into getting that bird back on the landscape. So it'll probably involve yeah, it's going to be a challenge for sure, but that is definitely our number one goal.
Let's go to
Right.
Troy and then Mike Gowell, and you stay right there.
Yep, Mike, you go ahead. You want to turn on your mic, Mike? Turn on your mic, Mike. That's good.
He might, yeah. Okay, so I don't know, maybe there's mic issues there. He did put a question in the chat, and I'll just read that out. Back in the 70s, okay, sorry if you know Mike, that's how he starts most of his questions. The resident population of Sula, I don't know that word, leucogaster, booby birds, boobies, on Arodi Island disappeared during adjacent DoD ammo wharf construction in 1977. I called it. Navy claimed the BTS caused this, but they returned over 45 years later. But they are threatened by new DoD construction. Are snakes impacting these large seabirds now before the new missile defense projects? That's definitely not for me.
Well, I'm not sure that's a question I can answer either. I am definitely.
That's a good question. Good question, Mike. And I would, I know that Martin Kastner, he does a lot of work with some of the resident seabirds there on Guam. So that would probably be a great question for him. He's not online right now, but that's a great question. So we'll try to get you an answer to that once we get offline. So thank you for asking. All right. Any other questions in the chat? Nothing in the chat. Anything in the room there?
We had Senator Sabina back. Yeah. If I want more? Sure. There was Senator Sabina had a comment saying, this is good, this is awesome, and if we could broadcast it more, that it would encourage more citizen science. So I think you missed the part earlier in the introduction when I was welcoming the room. So we had a brown tree snake conference last year that was canceled due to Doge and the government shutdown at the time. And so it evolved into a weekly online seminar series. and it's mostly people involved with the brown tree snake research sphere and management sphere. And then I just kind of insert myself and just share my videos. And so now there's the online portion, and that was really the focus of this, but I like having an audience to vibe with. And so I asked Miguel if like, hey, can I just like use the room real quick? And he was gracious to allow me to use this room earlier than they would ever normally open it. And so I'm happy to do more of these if we have other opportunities or venues. And if we can, you know, I'll speak. I have no stage fright, as you can tell. I'll speak to everybody in the world all at once if they're down. And I already forgot your question. There was a question at the end, right? Oh yes, thank you. Okay, so what is the most likely reason snakes made it to Dåno? So swimming, even I think it's not likely. But you know, if there was, you know, if let's say I'm making up numbers, if there was 100 snakes on Dåno, like I don't think it's impossible or inconceivable that 1 or 2 of them got there by swimming. I think the most likely situation is they hitched a ride on boats. And so, you know, having worked out there a lifetime ago, they, you know, they produce food waste, they produce trash, and that has to come back and forth on barges and so on. And some of those are tied up right next to the private pier there, or people hitching rides on their own boats, or hitching a ride on people's own boats too. And so I would think it got there somehow, maybe mixed with the trash. Before I got into snake stuff, like the most common place I would encounter snakes are actually on like dumpsters when I'm going to take the trash out at night. And so that's my suspicion, and I have 0 evidence to back that up. But that's my suspicion, and I'm going to guess that. Does that echo what everybody else thinks? Okay, everybody else thinks that too.
Real quick, Farron, I'm going to jump in, and if you could just convey this to the group of people in the room. Like the senator mentioned, we're always looking for more public outreach with the BTS world. And so if anyone wants to get on the BTS mailing list, they can contact me. My email is, you have my email information that you could share with those folks in the room. So just if you do that, I can make sure to add anyone. We do have a lot of fun outreach activities from the DOD side of things, from the National Park side of things, from Friends of Isla Dåno. So there's a lot of opportunities to do more or have the public more involved.
Yeah, so reach out to me and I can get you Troy's email, and he can put you on the email list. Yeah.
Okay.
We have another question in the room. Did I answer whatever the last question was? I did? Okay. Yes, ma'am. I'm looking at Meg right now.
So this is a really good BTS question. If there's anybody in the rest of the online that could answer this better. If I'm remembering correctly, I believe there was a study that did a genetic analysis to see, to estimate how many snakes it would have taken to produce this entire population based on the genetic diversity present in the current population. And I believe the estimate was somewhere in the neighborhood of only 10 snakes would have been sufficient.
Is that a question about the original?
The question was how many individuals were probably introduced to Guam that would explain the current genetic makeup?
Yeah, and so some of our great USGS folks, I think, dropped off, but Lauren is correct from that research paper that was projected that there was less than 10 original individuals.
Okay, cool. Good question. Okay. Do we have to leave? Are we okay? I just realized how far we are. Okay. All right.
Anything else in there, Farron?
There's some audience interaction happening. Olympia is saying it was a really good question. Guam is like a textbook example of introductions and how populations can grow from X number of individuals and how they're related closely or distantly. Sorry, I'm just trying to repeat what you said online. Okay. Okay, so if there is nothing else, my computer's gonna die. So
good. And for you guys, Farron, in the room, if you want to keep things going, I'm going to end the recording here. But for all of you that joined online, thanks so much. And it was awesome to have the hybrid sort of setup. So Farron and Lauren, thank you for having that in-person interaction. That sounds like it was a really fun day. For everyone else, I hope to see you next week and hope you all have a good rest of your week and keep your eye out for those brown tree snakes in your toilet. All right, everyone, have a good rest of your week. Take it easy.
All right. Thanks, everybody.